Thanks, Graham. So, yeah, I'm going to spend around 15 minutes covering the background and the context of the consultation, outlining the consultation process as well, and I'll highlight our key proposals that we're making. I'm also going to touch on the evidence base for our approach, the impact assessments that we've carried out, and then also explain a little bit about next steps. So to give you first some background on why we're consulting now and what shaped our proposals, first thing to call out is the focus of our consultation that is currently running is very much on general qualifications, so GCSE, AS and A-levels. We do touch on VTQs, but the main focus is on those qualifications, and I'll touch a bit more on that as I go through. So as the regulator, Ofqual's job is to make sure maintenance of standards, fairness, public confidence and secure delivery are always front and centre. We regulate the 4 exam boards delivering GCSEs, AS and A-levels to ensure exams are high quality, valid, reliable and fair. Currently, our regulations don't specify whether exams should be taken on paper or on screen. And we have no specific rules relating to on-screen assessment. Most of these exams are still taken with pen and paper. There are a handful of GCSE and A-level specifications in the market that do use on-screen assessment. But currently, there's nothing to prevent exam boards from submitting any number of on-screen specifications for accreditation. It's absolutely critical that these qualifications are not just fair, but are also seen to be fair. On-screen assessment could potentially benefit some students by improving accessibility or making the assessment experience better for certain groups, and also by helping to prepare young people for a digital future. But our research shows that students can perform differently, depending on whether they're working on paper or on screen. Not every student has the same access to digital devices or the same level of digital skills. Schools and colleges in England also face practical challenges, like differences in their IT infrastructure. And so if any move to greater on-screen assessment isn't carefully managed, there's a real risk of widening existing gaps in achievement. Maintaining standards across both on-screen and paper-based exams is complex. Digital delivery brings new risks, such as cybersecurity threats, technical failures that can be stressful for students and centres, teachers working in schools and colleges, and might also affect the validity of results, as well as the potential for new forms of malpractice. So for Ofqual, making sure standards are maintained and that exams are delivered safely and securely is absolutely central. The curriculum and assessment review that was carried out in England highlighted calls for greater integration of technology in assessment, recognising the potential benefits, but also noting that evidence is still limited and that wider implementation would have considerable delivery implications for schools and colleges. That's why we're proposing a controlled approach. Pen and paper exams will remain central for most subjects, and any further on-screen assessment will be carefully managed. These proposals have been developed in close engagement with the Department for Education, and we've taken full account of a steer from the Secretary of State. The message from government is clear here. Any wider use of on-screen exams must be fair for students, proportionate and manageable for schools and colleges to deliver with the staff, infrastructure and resources they have currently. So this consultation is very much about finding the right balance, supporting responsible innovation while making sure that changes to assessment are carefully managed to protect standards, fairness, public confidence and reliable delivery. So before I move on to the detail of the proposals, I just want to cover some of the practical details of the consultation. We launched the consultation back in December, on the 11th of December, and it's running for 12 weeks. So there's 14 days left for people to submit their views, and it will close on the 5th of March. Submissions can be made online. There's an online form for people to share their views. As well as launching the consultation, we published the evidence base alongside, so people can see the research and the analysis that's informed our proposals. And I'll touch a bit more on that shortly. We've also published a quick, easy to read blog for teachers to help explain our proposed approach. And also on this slide, we've linked to the Secretary of State steer letter that I mentioned. We're really keen to hear from a wide range of voices across the sector. Every response will help shape our final approach. It's really important for us that we gather as many perspectives as possible. So very grateful for everybody joining today's session, and grateful for people taking the time to respond either through e-Assessment Association or themselves through our consultation. So I'm now going to move on to provide a bit more detail on our proposals. Firstly, our controlled approach is shaped by these 4 guiding principles. Risks to standards, public confidence and fairness arising from on-screen assessment will be appropriately mitigated. On-screen assessment maintains and wherever possible enhances the quality of the assessment experience for students and centres. On-screen assessment maintains and wherever possible enhances accessibility for students with special educational needs and disabilities. And finally, on-screen assessment platforms, awarding organisation arrangements and centre arrangements are demonstrably capable of supporting secure and reliable assessment delivery. These principles are intended to ensure that any introduction of on-screen assessment maintains standards, protects students' interests, and upholds public confidence in these qualifications. A key decision underpinning our approach is that any new on-screen assessment will be subject to a rigorous accreditation process and must receive formal accreditation from Ofqual before it can be offered to students. Following this consultation, we'll consider the specific requirements that exam boards must meet at accreditation and also on an ongoing basis. But for now, each of these guiding principles set the direction for Ofqual's approach, but we plan to add further detail to these principles in later technical consultation that we'll run. So in terms of the key proposals that are in our consultation, I'm going to talk you through each of these and explain some of the thinking behind each one. So firstly, we're proposing to introduce specific regulations for on-screen assessment. As I said, currently our framework doesn't restrict on-screen assessment, but with the potential for wider adoption, we need clear rules to make sure standards, fairness and public confidence are protected. Alongside this, we're taking a controlled approach to entry. So on-screen assessment will no longer generally be permitted in GCSEs, AS and A-levels, except in a limited set of cases. Each exam board may propose up to 2 new on-screen specifications for accreditation. This is very much about managing the scale and pace of change, making sure that any further introduction of on-screen assessment is proportionate, manageable and deliverable for schools and colleges. This 2 specification limit per exam board will be kept under review. There are some important exceptions. So outside of the 2 specification limit per exam board, on-screen assessment will continue to be allowed in subjects where it's important for validity or integral to the assessment approach. Currently, that includes computer science, British Sign Language and music technology. This also applies to existing specifications already using on-screen assessment. They'll be allowed to continue, as well as the use of on-screen assessment as a reasonable adjustment, where this meets specific accessibility needs for disabled students. That will continue to be allowed. We're also proposing introducing subject restrictions. Taking into account a steer from the Secretary of State, on-screen assessment won't be permitted in the highest entry subjects. So those with over 100,000 entries nationally. We believe this is the right restriction to put in place, reflecting concerns about the manageability of large-scale implementation, the need to protect students and schools and colleges from delivery risks, and the importance of maintaining public confidence in qualifications. This approach allows the sector to build capability and generate robust evidence from smaller scale implementation before considering wider changes. Another key proposal is that on-screen and paper-based assessments must be offered as separate specifications with sufficiently different questions for each. Our research shows that students can perform differently depending on whether an exam is taken on paper or on screen. These differences, known as mode effects, can make one mode more or less demanding than the other. While it's technically possible to manage mode effects by setting different grade boundaries for each mode, doing so within the same specification could create confusion and undermine confidence in results. Requiring substantially different questions between modes will further support fairness, validity, and standards. We're not requiring exam boards to offer a paper-based alternative alongside any new on-screen specification. And so there is a risk that certain subjects, particularly those with fewer specifications and lower entry numbers, could be available only through on-screen assessment with no paper-based alternative. However, it's likely to be in exam boards' interests to continue to meet market demand for paper-based assessment whilst it exists, or to provide the means to participate in on-screen assessment. We're also setting clear expectations for assessment platforms and devices. We won't mandate exam boards use a single assessment platform, as we don't think this would be appropriate or practical and would require major market intervention. However, we will set expectations that platforms are consistent, secure, reliable, and accessible. Students won't be allowed to use their own personal devices for on-screen exams to help ensure fairness and consistency. School-managed devices will be used, and these will be allowed to be used for learning as well as for exams. So we're asking specific questions on each of these proposals, as well as on the guiding principles in the consultation. And as I said, feedback on these is really important to help shape our final approach. Finally, we're also keen to hear views on whether the guiding principles for GCSEs and A-levels could be used for vocational and technical qualifications with similar purposes, and what additional impacts or considerations we should take into account. So I mentioned that we also have published our evidence base at the same time as launching the consultation. We've published 4 research reports, and together they provide the foundation for our proposed approach. The studies cover a lot of ground. They include international comparisons, looking at how other countries have approached on-screen assessment. We've looked at potential impacts on schools, colleges, students, and awarding organisations here in England. We've explored mode effects and also the risks and potential mitigations around delivery, security, and fairness, as well as other areas. The research draws on both primary evidence, such as surveys, interviews, focus groups with students, teachers, school staff, subject experts, and awarding organisations, as well as a review of existing academic literature. And some of this work was done jointly with the Department for Education. It's a really comprehensive look at the opportunities, benefits, risks, and challenges, and all of this has directly shaped the proposals we're putting forward. We've also published a short summary that brings together the key findings from all 4 reports. So for people who don't have time to read the full reports, you can still get a clear sense of the evidence and how it's informed our thinking. We've also carried out both an equality impact assessment and a regulatory impact assessment ahead of launching the consultation. And we've published those assessments alongside the proposals. The equality impact assessment looks specifically at how our proposals could affect students with protected characteristics, as well as other groups like those from different socioeconomic backgrounds. The regulatory impact assessment focuses on the potential impact for awarding organisations, but also considers schools and colleges. These assessments are very much a starting point. We're really keen for people to read them in full and let us know if there are impacts or issues we haven't considered. Feedback on these are really important to help us to develop and refine these assessments further, and then also to help develop our approach. So just to wrap up, in terms of next steps, so once the consultation closes on the 5th of March, we'll carefully read through each response, and then we'll report on the findings from that consultation later in the year. Views submitted through the consultation, as I've said, will inform our final approach and what proposals we take forward. If we do decide to move forward, We'll then follow this up with a technical consultation. The technical consultation will cover specific rule changes to our framework, any guidance that we might look to introduce, and that would happen later this year. New specifications would then need to be developed and accredited and be in schools 1 year ahead of first teaching, 3 years ahead of first examining. So we're really looking at around 2030 for the earliest first delivery of any new on-screen assessment for students in these qualifications. And as I've said a few times, we're really keen to make sure we get a really good mix of responses. So very grateful in advance for people taking the time to join today and let us know their thoughts. And thank you to anybody who's already submitted their views to our consultation as well.